Prelude to Ulysses. Alex reads Ancient Evenings by Norman Mailer. We are now on the Book of the Child, Part 7. Last time, Menenhedet II inhabited the brain of his mama, found out that his great-grandpa was almost his dad, but chose not to. His great-grandpa also has the ability to... We've learned that his great-grandfather, Menenhedet I, has the ability to transfer his consciousness into the body of a child if he ejaculates inside of a woman, conceives a child at the moment of his death. He can continue to live and live and live, but he didn't do that. He did not do that. Let's read what's on this T. Peace of mind comes piece by piece. Thanks, T. All right. It's been a while since I read this. Ancient Evenings, The Book of the Child, Part 7. What I had just learned was bound to affect me forever. Yet the subject was so strange, I might as well have awakened from a dream. Maybe that is why my confusion began to clear on our return to the Pharaoh's balcony. There, everything was much as I had left it. While Menenhedet was now sitting on the other side of Ptah-nem-hotep, so too had my picture of where I had expected him to be shifted, to be also shifted. There was nothing to startle my eye. Below, on the patio, a counselor was speaking of work in the quarries. I could see by a look on my father's face that these were not matters of grave importance. I had often heard my mother say that my father never had a thought of his own, and so his face could reflect everyone else's. I know I did not understand what she meant until the day she told him that his manners were superb because he was never bothered by the manners he had been born with. Instead, he imitated the best manners he saw. That was a true description of my father. The angle at which one nobleman might cock his wrist quickly became, if my father thought it just, his own turn of the wrist. So did he copy the delicate touch by which Ptah-nem-hotep, it's P-T-A-H, that probably is Ta, right? Not Ptah, pterodactyl. Ptah-nem-hotep, let's try to remember to do that, brought a finger to the side of his nose when he was contemplating which fine remark to make. But then my father would even imitate the irony with which my great-grandfather might bow his head to indicate he did not agree with what you just said. I do not mean to say that my father acted foolishly. Today he had most certainly been ill at ease while attempting to serve the pharaoh, with my mother looking on. But on calmer occasions he would appear to those who did not know him well as a distinguished nobleman. The white of his linen was never soiled, and the charcoal with which he painted his eyes rarely smudged. His jewelry did not miss a stone. Since gems and beads were always falling out as their fastenings loosened, not even my mother could present so impeccable an appearance as my father. In court, his manner, which is to say his fine collection of manners, served him well. Because I heard him talk of it in my family, I knew that it was necessary for the pharaoh to have a man nearby who could make clear, by no more than the change of an expression on his face, whether the matter directed to his attention, his being the pharaoh's, had been proposed in suitable language. What a look of exasperation would come over my father's face if the poor official speaking from the patio below had a hoarseness of throat, a stammer, or an inability to keep from repeating his facts. So it was not difficult to understand that my father was of good service to Ta-Nem-Otep. Certainly my father's expressions kept me most aware of the pharaoh's immaculate sensitivity. How could that not be so when my father's face showed pain at every improper sound, and thereby caused me to feel how delicate were the pharaoh's ears? Any sudden interruption of mood made him wince within, as at the wanton collapse of the walls of a fine building. Now I knew why he had kept listening to Kem Usha. Although he detested what was being said, Kem Usha's solemn voice might be as oppressive to the mind of the pharaoh as the slow insertion of clay in his nostrils. But Kem Usha never altered his tones, so no matter what other plans he might inflict, his voice would not irritate the pharaoh's ear. The man speaking at this moment, however, was another matter. I could see by the encouragement in my father's eyes that Ta-Nem-Hotep was not without sympathy for the fellow or his office. That the pharaoh was also confident of his ability to offer good service in this case could be told by the light but haughty touch of my father's finger to the side of his nose. His skill was to detect each change in the pharaoh's attitude and reflect that back to the court. So he was as quick to each whim of Ta-Nem-Hotep as I to the readiness of my mother to let me come into her thoughts. I could see by the look of strain across my father's brow that the official below, while personally inoffensive, even in the modest measure, estimable to Ta-Nem-Hotep, had a voice all the same to bother his ears. On the other hand, my father's face was full of patience, which told me much about the pharaoh. The man now speaking had generations of quarrymen in his voice, all with the same powerful back and legs. It was the throat to declare that the man who spoke was sober, and knew what he knew. So his speech in the main was agreeable and tasted of bread and soup, and the strength of family flesh. Of course, it had also the sound of stones pouring on other stones. His brain, as a result, was sluggish. Thoughts did not come to him quickly. His tongue, like a crushed and crippled leg, never knew when it would stumble. His mind, forever short of breath, would sometimes heave and fail to move. To the pharaoh's ear, these lapses were as disturbing as the clatter of a stick smashing a jar. Part of the difficulty was that the quarryman did not know how to read. So he had memorized the names of the men in the labor gang, the number of their injuries, their wages, the accounts for food. He was correct, but he was slow. Besides, his recital was hardly necessary. A scribe stood beside him with a roll of papyrus, and nodded his head in confirmation at each number recited by the manager of the quarries. I wonder why the scribe did not read from the papyrus himself, but it was obvious, by the attention Ta-Nem-Hotep was given to the quarry official, that the bearing of the man and his ability to remember could tell much about his honesty. My mother's mind, when I tried to enter it again, was closed to me, or should I say, closed to all I would wish to ask. With her skill, was it equal to mine, of knowing what was in my thoughts? She had chosen to give all her attention to that poor quarry official. So by placing myself in her mind, I was given over to nothing better than the admirable introduction to the difficulties of mining rock. She took the numbers offered by this chief workingman and tried to see what his men were doing. Yet by the time it passed from her head to mine, my toes were wriggling. Nonetheless, by such a roundabout method of instruction, I came to understand why the pharaoh listened so carefully, and by a worthy and most serious effort, I passed beyond my boredom and came to recognize that this crude official, Rutsek, was respected, even as his father and grandfather before him. They had all been overseers at the great quarries to the east of Memphis, where, shortly after the ascension of Ramses IX to the throne, a road was begun across the desert to a great sea called the Red Sea. Since we were now in the 7th year of the reign, I decided that the road was as old as I was, at least if you counted the months I had lived within my mother. So this increased my interest. I now began to comprehend that the problems on this road were curious. Ta-Nem-Hotep wanted to keep it a royal road, that is, wide enough for 2 royal carts to pass in opposite directions, which meant a breadth of 8 horses. While such a width would be nothing grand in the Memphis, where the avenue of Ramses II offered a breadth of 20 horses from the marketplace to the temple of Ptah, still the road of Ramses IX would find difficulty as it went through the mountains, given the steep slopes. Great rocks that could have been used for monuments tumbled into the ravines below. In one place, said Rock Cutter, they had lost a week trying to raise a large block high enough to insert a sledge beneath. Rock Cutter confessed that the sledge, which once inserted, had collapsed from the weight and tilted the rock towards the ravine. After much consideration, they had to push it over. No sound, he confessed, was so filling with the thunder of the gods as the echoes of that stone falling. It was a great loss, my pharaoh, said Rutsek, yet I did not know another way. 118 men had been employed in just that place for 7 days, and could not proceed farther without removing the stone. During this delay, there was an expenditure of 10 bags of grain, 2 large amphoria of oil, 3 amphoria of honey, 22 small bags of onions, 541 loaves of bread, 4 amphoria of the wine of Buto. His forehead creased with each figure recited, as if each item had been sniffed for rot, hefted for weight, tasted for value. My father nodded gravely to indicate that Ta-Nem-Hotep respected the honesty of Rock Cutter at confessing to such mistakes. It is to your honor, the pharaoh now said, that you present the unfinished aspects of your task as quickly as the well-faced. The virtue of your character is as fresh to me as the virtuous odor of the pine trees in my innermost courtyard. We will, went a thought from my mother's mind to me, clear as if she had said it out loud. He will now certainly begin to brag about his imported pine trees. In the 1st year of my reign, said Ta-Nem-Hotep, I had 21 young pines from the mountains of Syria brought across the sea to be planted in my innermost courtyard. There 14 now stand, still alive. Although it is said that all would perish in a season, they are trees of the mountain and cold air. But they have a spirit of honest virtue like your own, Rutsek, that speaks of clear mornings and hard work. Yes, I will let you smell the fragrances of their virtue when the road is done. I am honored, said Rock Cutter, looking at his feet. He seemed more than a little confused at the interception of his recital, for the facts he had memorized must have been coming forward in his brain like oxen, one by one, each carrying a measured load, and whipped just often enough to keep from stopping. Yes, said Ta-Nem-Hotep, it is honest to confess one's errors with other officials. He swept the courtyard with his look. I must find my way to listen to their presentation. Nothing is wrong. Nothing will ever be wrong, yet all is wrong. Yes, said Ta-Nem-Hotep. Rock Cutter bowed again. Nonetheless, said our pharaoh, progress on the road is slow. Injuries are numerous, and the losses in the losses in the labor force are discouraging. Yes, my lord, many of my men have gone blind. Is it from dust or from splinters of stone? It is the second, great Two-House. When you gave your last report to me in the month of Farmuti, I recall that we talked about the scraping of the rocks. I asked you then to employ cedar chips to make coals.
Hi, Lotus. Are you scratching me?
Oh, what a good girl. I asked you then to employ cedar chips to make the coals. I obeyed you, my lord. I do not know if I would have been able to understand what they now said, but by way of my mother's thoughts, I was able to see a thick bed of stone on which were laid hot coals in a narrow channel. When the bed had taken the heat of the coals, water was poured on. I listened to the hiss of steam and saw the wet ash wiped away. A myriad of cracks were left in the groove, numerous as the cracks in clay when the flood is gone and the sun bakes the earth. I saw men chipping at these cracks with copper chisels and wooden mallets. After they were done, the channel, wide as a man's hand, had been deepened by the thickness of a finger. That was half a morning's work for 2 men. They would do it until the channel was deep enough to split the rock, sometimes cubits deep. Cool. I had already been taught to make measurements by these cubits, and was told the size had first been taken from the tip of Ramsay II's middle finger to his elbow. I went around telling everyone that I had measured more than 2 cubits tall. 2 cubits, 1 hand, 2 fingers. Large for a child my age, was it not? And kept doing it until my mother told me to cease. 2 cubits was nothing, she let me know, next to a man of 4 cubits. She had even seen a giant of 5 cubits. I ceased then to be concerned with this measure. But such talk now between the pharaoh and rock cutter refreshed my mother's memory of a cubit, and she began to think about a great pharaoh, tall and beautiful and vastly more like a god than Ptah-nem-hotep. I knew this could be no other than Ramses II, but my mother saw him as if he were alive before us. His arm extended, and prayers said by priests as the measurement was taken by the royal string of the royal scribe. This was my mother's offering to me of how the cubit had first been measured, but she was so full of pleasure, the late afternoon sun on the balcony now shining on her thighs, that she took her own measure of the cubit, and held the royal string to herself. Lo, the mighty phallus of Ramses II was equal to half the length. But since she saw him equal to himself before a mirror, the 2 phalluses, nose to nose, were the perfect royal measure if you took it from the root of one set of testicles over completely to the other. Then my mother left off thinking of cubits. She had just recognized that my mind was in hers again. I, in turn, realized why she could never do arithmetic. She was not certain whether to be pleased at her closeness or appalled at the rush of my education. But she smiled at me, and most tenderly, a naughty smile, and opening her mind to me again as easily as she might open her arms. So I rushed into the trap of her amusement, for she now saw it as her motherly duty to instruct me in sad thoughts. I was therefore now obliged to contemplate all the poor stone-cutters who were going blind from the dust that flew out of pounding one stone upon another while dressing the face of an extracted rock. I saw some with red-rimmed eyes, and others with blood from open cuts above their brows. One danced in pain, a stone splinter sticking to his eyeball. An atrocious set of sights, until I realized my mother had put them together for me, and I was seeing all at once the quarry injuries for a full year. Just gotta pause it for a minute. Now my mother, as if to make amends for her scandalous thoughts about the length of the cubit of Ramses II, began to listen again to Ptah-nem-hotep. He wished to know the time it took to make a channel in stone when cedar chips were used for the coals, as compared to how long it required when chips from the date palm, sycamore, tamarisk, or acacia were employed. So he questioned Rutsek closely. Rutsek assured our pharaoh that he had put 3 of his best men on the cut while using cedar chips. It had still taken 14 days for a cut 2 cubits long and 4 deep to be accomplished by this gang. That had only been 1 day less than a cut of equal size done with sycamore chips whose coals had already been found superior to acacia, date palm, or tamarisk. If your fastest gang, said Ta-Nemhotep, is only 1 day faster than your average gang, the fires of cedar can hardly be more effective than the fires of the sycamore. Rutsek touched his forehead to the ground. Yet your first reports, said Ta-Nemhotep, told of cracks made of coals by cedar that were half a finger deeper than the hottest embers of the sycamore. That is true, great Two-House. Then why is the job not done faster? As if the intimate discussion of these matters allowed Rutsek to forget to whom he spoke, he shrugged. It was the gesture of one working man speaking to another, and only a momentary flaw in the immense respect he showed the pharaoh. But by the measure of disgust on my father's face, Rock Cutter might as well have allowed an indiscreet sound to come popping out of his buttocks. That's a fart. The overseer must have taken in my father's face, for he touched his forehead quickly to the ground and said in sorrow, "My pharaoh, I thought it would be quicker." Then it was all silent. Ta-Nemhotep's lips pressed against one another, but he said nothing. In the silence, I could smell the smoke of cedar chips, and understood that I was in Rock Cutter's thoughts. By way of my mother or myself, I hardly knew. But I was in his thoughts, except he hardly had them. It was more as if he had moved from odor to odor when he was not ruminating over his figures to the pharaoh. Then his head was like a shadow, listening to a pail of water in one sturdy movement, emptying it, repeating the work. Now, with the memory of the smoke in his nostrils, he said, "Great Two-House, it was faster with the cedar, but the men made more mistakes." Rock Cutter sighed. "We had more injuries when working with the cedar. The men said it was cursed." "How did you reply?" "I whipped them." "Now you are here before me, you may speak the truth." "Your pharaoh is blind and dumb if none speak the truth." "I would speak it, great Two-House." "Do. Even liars do well to speak the truth on the day of the pig." "Great Two-House, I whipped my men with a heart so full, I became afraid of the pains in my chest." "Why did you feel such clamor?" "Because, my pharaoh, I could not disagree with my men. The odor of the smoke was strange." But Ta-Nemhotep nodded. "Cedar comes from the shore of Byblos, where the coffin of Osiris came to rest in such a tree." "Yes, my lord," said Rock Cutter. "If cedar was once the home of the great god Osiris, the chips of the tree can never be cursed." "Yes, my lord." Rock Cutter stood there. "It is the day of the pig, great Two-House," he said at last. "Speak the truth." "My men do not often talk of the god Osiris. For us it is better to go to the temple of Ammon." Rock Cutter bowed his head once more to the dust. "Don't you know," said Ta-Nemhotep, "that Osiris is the god who will judge you in the land of the dead?" Rock Cutter shook his head. "I am only an overseer. It is not for me to journey through the land of the dead." "But you are a royal overseer. You may travel with your pharaoh." Ta-Nemhotep turned to my father. "Can there be many royal overseers," he asked, "who do not understand this value of the office?" "Not many, great Ta-Nemhotep," said my father. "One is too many," said the pharaoh, and gave back his attention to Rutsek. "The honor that I offer," he said, "incites the light of no gratitude in your eyes." "Great Two-House, I know that I will never be a voyager in the land of the dead." "Is it because you cannot afford to be buried properly?" asked Ta-Nemhotep. Do not despair. Poorer men than you have become wealthy in my service. When I die, I shall be dead, great God. How do you know? Asked Ta-Nem-Hotep. I hear it in the sound one stone makes when it pounds against another. Ta-Nem-Hotep said, That is an interesting remark. Abruptly, he yawned. In the court, everyone immediately yawned. Interesting. We will not use the cedar chips, said the pharaoh. Their fires are hotter, their cracks go deeper. It is even a wood blessed by Osiris. But to a simple mind, the fire is strange. It may go easier, great Two House, said Rutsek, if my men work with smoke, to which they are accustomed. Ta-Nem-Hotep nodded. Rutsek was dismissed with a small movement of his hand. Other officials came in, to be followed by others. I could not give my attention to all they said, and soon I could not give any attention. My mother frowned when I would scratch my navel, or rub my toes on the tiles of the floor. But then she was of small help. Her mind had become as empty as mine, and drifted like the boat of reeds. I began to wish I were back in the rose room, where I could enter again into the mind of my pharaoh. Here, not 5 cubits from his throne, I could not follow his words, nor know his thoughts. Memory came to me of the banquet my family would enjoy with Ta-Nem-Hotep that evening. A curious way to express it, but I did not feel as if I looked forward to the night of the pigs so much as that it had already taken place, and I need only remember what I must have already forgotten. Going forth in one life was much like recollecting another. Thinking of that, then thinking of nothing at all, I listened while officials came and went and spoke of many matters. Of course, I could not follow all that was said. One official reported on the condition of the dikes around Busiris in the delta, and another spoke of work on the dams. A third told of draining the lakes and the difficulties of drying and salting the mud eels found on the bottom. I drifted back to the wonders of that golden morning so long ago. Yet just this morning, when I had seen a few fishing boats with their catch hanging on ropes that ran down from the top of the mast to the prow and stern, they had gutted their fish and hung them up like clothes to dry. We came close to one such craft, and the odor was clean and stinking at once, as if the blood of the river, which is to say the blood of the fish, had been washed in the sun. And that took me so far away from the pharaoh and his serious concerns that I did not listen to the report on work in the mines, nor to the pharaoh's recommendation for using the horn of a gazelle as a socket superior to ivory for the spindle of a rock drill. I could not follow that either, and by way of my mother's drowsy opinion, I thought little of a general of the armies, whose face was covered with scars and open ulcers. He was a tall, fierce-looking man, but had only defeats to report. Hey, dog. He was a tall, fierce-looking man, but had only defeats to report, and spoke of towns on the borders of Lower Egypt being burned by Syrian raiders. Do I never hear talk of victory? Asked the pharaoh, and the general began to shake from the onslaught of a fever he had caught in his campaigns. I do not think it was fear he felt so much as a great chill, but he could not stop shivering. There was a long inquiry by Ta-Nem-Hotep into the ownership of the banks of an irrigation canal, where 2 adjoining estates were in dispute over the amount of water to be removed from the canal. This soon turned into another dispute between the same noblemen about the shifting of boundary stones. Accounts were brought by royal officials against merchants accused of mixing sand in the palace flour, and one official read out from a list of names of ships that must be declared lost at sea. No word had been received from them in 3 years. I amused myself by trying to come near my mother's mind once more. I do not know if it was my thoughts or her thoughts, but I had started to think of the strangeness of fire, and wondered if in the flame lived the voice of all that was burning. That it was not only the material which burned, but the thoughts of the gods who lived in that country. At this instant, I felt the Pharaoh looking at me, opened my eyes, and realized I had been passing through his thoughts. You farted, Lotus! Oh my god! Gross. All right, 30, 40. That's where the Lotus fart is. 30, 40. For the look in our eyes belonged to each of us, and we were in this way equal and brothers. I realized that I had certainly been asleep. The officials were gone. Evening had come to the patio, and the Pharaoh was smiling. Come, little prince, he said, it is time for us to eat. And he took me by the hand, while I felt the fatigue of his blood for all the long work of this afternoon. Once again, I am just happy to read a book like this. He is just kind of flying through people's thoughts a little bit. He's learning his dad's value, and his dad's job is pretty interesting. He's just there as a caricature of emotion. Not a caricature, but a emotion filter. He knows what the Pharaoh wants and what the Pharaoh wants to convey, and ahead of what the Pharaoh even says. So he will acknowledge like slip-ups with respect when it comes to people, how they refer to the Pharaoh. Does that make sense? I'm not making a lot of sense. It's a weird job. Who the fuck cares about that type of shit? It's crazy. I like the Pharaoh's attitude about himself. That didn't really come up in here, though. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, I'm looking forward. I gotta look backwards. So mostly it's talking about Rock Cutter, about how much issues they're having, trying to cut a huge swath of mountainous area out, it seems like, and how they do that is by creating like a line of coals, heat up the rock, and then pour water on it to crack the rock below. But they have superstition about which types of rock they actually want. Oh shit, I gotta go get my food. And they're talking about the rocks and how to split them, and how it's just taking an incredible amount of time, and they keep on running into weird failures where they would try to get a wedge in there, but they crush the wedge and weren't able to even do it. And the Pharaoh's just like, whatever, man. All right, let's just do it how you guys want to do it. And that's how we'll do it. Okay? And then throughout the rest of the afternoon and evening, our little hero, Psychic Menenhedet 2, just kind of zones out, it seems like, and is only able to interpret the speaking and I guess court judgments of some pretty basic things. Someone like, some people are lost at sea after 3 years. That's like when they call it. Someone's putting flour or sand in the flour to weigh it. You know, what's that word? To juice it down. What's it called when you put baby laxative in your drugs? Come on, Bobby. Oh my God, what's that called? Tying it down? I'm so dumb. I need to be a better drug dealer like Bobby Briggs. I'm about old enough to play a high schooler in Twin Peaks. All right. I don't know, man. What happened at the end there? Kind of lost it. Oh, it seems like him and the Pharaoh seem to have a moment together where they like look at each other, and the Pharaoh acknowledges that he is likely a psychic, or not psychic. Is it empath when you read people's thoughts? Telepathic. What? I don't know. So fun. What a fun book to read. Which, I can handle chapters that are that long. All right. Okay.